Lesson 3, format options for saving your photos. There are two main formats cameras use to save your photos. It's important to understand the differences, especially when you want to edit your photos. Usually when you're taking photos with your phone, there's no option. It always saves them as JPEG files. Using your camera, the main two formats for saving your photos are RAW and JPEG. You have the option of saving your photos as RAW or as JPEG, or on most cameras you can choose to save both RAW and JPEG simultaneously. In this lesson, I'll talk about the pros and cons of both formats. When you save your photos as RAW files, your camera retains all of the data it captures when you take the photograph. It means the files are larger than JPEGs, but they retain all of the information and all of the detail. This may not seem so relevant if you're really only sharing your photos on social media or using them for a very small size. But when you come to want to edit your photos or to make a print enlargement of your photos, you really do have a lot of advantage to save your photos as RAW files rather than only saving them as smaller JPEGs. RAW files have a special file extension depending on what camera you use. Many Nikon cameras use the .NEF format. Canon uses CR2 or CR3. Sony uses ARW. These proprietary formats are all RAW formats that contain all of the data that your camera captures. This means that there's no data lost when the camera saves the file to the memory card. RAW files generally look quite flat and dull and lifeless when you first import them to your computer. You need to use some editing software to make them pop, to enhance them, to give them a bit of life. All of the information about the color and the light and the contrast is there. You just have to manipulate it a little bit to get your photos looking right. And this is not so difficult to do. JPEG files are saved as what's called a lossy format. This means that some of the data is lost or discarded when the file is saved. The camera compresses the image before it saves it to the memory card. This means JPEG files are smaller and lower quality than RAW files. As your camera saves a JPEG file to your memory card, it also applies some editing to it. Depending on how your camera is set up, it'll apply some sharpening, some contrast changes, maybe tweak the color a little bit and the brightness a little bit. This often means that photos that are saved as JPEGs require no additional editing before you share them. When your camera saves JPEGs, you have some options about the quality and size of your photos. This has to do with the amount of compression the camera applies and to the dimensions of the images that you save. The less compression and the larger dimensions you choose to save your JPEGs as, the larger the file will be and the better the quality will be. Smaller dimensions and more compression means smaller file sizes. It also means that these files will be lower quality. If you do choose to save only JPEG files on your camera, I recommend saving larger file sizes. Don't be tempted to save the smaller file sizes because you will be disappointed in the quality on these images. Many cameras allow you to save both RAW and JPEG files each time you take a photo. This allows you to share the JPEG files straight away and retain the RAW files for editing later if you choose to. The drawbacks for saving both RAW and JPEGs are that 1, your memory cards will fill up faster, and 2, you'll be slowed down somewhat if you're taking photos in quick succession because the camera has to take more time to save both these file types to your memory card. Lesson 3, practical exercise. Format options for saving your photos. This exercise will help you learn more about the practical differences of saving RAW and or JPEG files when you take photos. Set your camera to save both RAW and JPEG and set the JPEG file size and quality to the lowest possible standard. That's the one I recommended that you shouldn't do, but for this exercise I want you to try it so that you can see the differences clearly. And if you want to, take another set of photos of the same subjects using the highest quality JPEG setting that your camera has as well. Take some photos of a subject in strong light. Outside on a sunny day will be ideal. Anywhere that there's a lot of contrast between the brightest and darkest parts of your composition. I've got a cloudy day here today, so I'll do this one all in the shade. I've got a light set up, and I've chosen items to photograph that have got some contrast, some black and some white, and some colour. So this will help to illustrate the differences better. Compare the two sets of photos when you look at them on your computer. Enlarge both the RAW and the JPEG files to 100%. Look for differences in the image quality between the RAW files and the small JPEG files. You will probably find there's some visible imperfections in the JPEG files. You'll also notice that the colours and contrast in the RAW files is rather flat and dull. You will not see this when you're looking at the images on your camera's monitor, because this only shows you a proxy image, not the actual RAW image. To edit your RAW files, you need software like Adobe Lightroom, Affinity Photo, or similar image editing software. The main points from this lesson are: RAW and JPEG are the two most common file formats cameras have. RAW files contain all the data the camera captures when you take photos. JPEG files are compressed by the camera as it saves them. Practice this to improve your photography. Take photos with your camera set to save both RAW and JPEG files. Compare the differences.